you very much, Gary. Hopefully you can see these slides. Please shout it when you can, just then I'll make a start.
All good, go for it.
Smashing, thank you. Well, thank you very much for this very, very kind invite. It's given me a chance to stop laying a patio, so that's some welcome respite for today. As Gary said, my name's Nigel Hallam. I've been the Workplace Parking Levy Service Manager for many years now. I was involved in the development of the scheme and I've managed the scheme since it started in October 2011. So I've seen it grow and I'm hopefully well placed to talk about how we've done. So, you know, why did Nottingham go for a WPL scheme? Because they are still, even now, 9-10 years on, incredibly contentious. But even back in 2007, congestion was costing the city of Nottingham £160 million a year. And over half that cost was borne directly by the employers in the city, you know, mainly through delays to the supply chain and the operation of their business, you know, delays to staff, etc., etc. Also, we had a looming forecast of a 15% increase in congestion by 2021. And our political leaders very much wanted a vibrant economy with alternatives to the car, principally through high quality, affordable public transport at that point. And they obviously had a vision for the city to improve its environment and the sustainability of the city. And this is all in the face of congestion was the prevailing issue at that time. Air quality and pollution wasn't quite the hot topic it is now. The City Council, like most local authorities, was having severe financial constraints with rapidly reducing government grants. Our transport infrastructure was ageing, and if we didn't do nothing, Nottingham's economy would have been gridlocked, as would the roads. So, you know, why WPL? It's a very different approach. So it's a demand management tool. And it disincentivises employers from providing workplace parking. And it does that through placing a modest charge on the provision of workplace parking. So workplace parking applies to vehicles driven by pupils, students, and another category that I'll talk about later. So, you know, the charge is currently £428 per place per year, and it's only ever paid by employers, although employers can pass some or all of the charge on to the end user, i.e. the vehicle user. And the price point is very, very important because Nottingham wanted to raise revenue to invest in some key objectives, but it's not anti-car, but it's very much pro-cycling, pro-public transport. And vehicle use in Nottingham is a choice. And our political leaders are saying we provide good public transport, particularly as you come towards the centre of Nottingham. So if you're going to sort of park, you're going to pay for that privilege. We've now seen 53% of all liable workplace parking places subject to a car park management scheme. That's where the actual employer offsets some or all of the cost of the levy by passing it on to the end vehicle users. And it's encouraged employers to be quite innovative and actually review their land assets. And a very good example of an employee doing that is Nottingham Trent University, which for those of you not familiar with Nottingham, it's a city centre based university with a number of campuses in the city, but it does have some in the outlying areas as well. They had a car park. It was probably a stone's throw from the city immediate marketplace in Nottingham, which is the background in the slide before you. It was riddled by auto crime. It was riddled by antisocial behaviour. And undesirable people, making it not a very nice place to go. So as a direct result of the levy, the university reviewed all their ANDL assets, and we've seen now for the past 6 or 7 years on what was a very derelict and defunct car park that did nothing to add to the university's image. We've now seen a number of fantastic state-of-the-art buildings used as halls of residences that really adds to the university's offer, provides high quality accommodation to students who've still got massively good access to the city centre and all the social life that Nottingham provides. And that's a really, really good example of how it's causing behaviour change for employers. The environment now is very different from what it was back when we were considering and developing the levy in the early noughties. The underpinning legislation is the Transport Act 2000. It was brought in under a Labour administration, and Nottingham got a fair bit of grant funding to develop their levy. Local authorities are now facing the massive challenge of improving air quality, and that's absolutely right. But one of the big issues is how do they raise the finances to do so? Because government grants have shrunk massively to local authorities. The WPL scheme is one way that local authorities can do that, and it's attracting massive interest all over the UK, but even around the world. I'm actually doing a lot of work now supporting other local authorities either consider or actually develop their own workplace parking levy, and I've also supported colleagues in New Zealand, part of the Get Wellington Moving project, considering a workplace parking levy for the capital city of New Zealand. So it's very, very exciting. Nottingham scheme was focused on constraining congestion growth and achieving modal shift. We wanted to do that by providing the electrification of a transport system, and you'll see later on how we've done that in Nottingham. The greater awareness of poor air quality and recognition at political levels, but also what I think fundamentally, the increasingly loud voice of public opinion. The amount of young people that are getting involved in issues surrounding the climate, because my generation's had a fantastic amount out of it, done an awful lot of harm arguably. We would like to put something back to try and make it better for future generations, and I certainly feel that way as a relatively new grandfather. What authorities need to do is raise revenue locally, because there is money at the centre of national government for projects around transport and other issues, but you've got to provide a local contribution, and that's where the WPL is becoming increasingly attractive, because there's only so many ways that you can do that. So what's the technical details around the WPL scheme? As I've said, it only applies to employers, so the fallacy that it applies to individual people is not correct. However, the cost can be passed on to the end user, and that's really where you get the biggest modal shift. It applies to employees, pupils and students, which are, I'm hoping, are fairly well understood categories. The category you might not be aware of is regular business visitors, and that's somebody who's not a pupil or student, but who visits an employer's premises 3 or more times in a 14-day period. Somebody like a contractor. Nottingham City Council, when we were developing our tram network, we had a lot of experts, consultants that were embedded in the council for years at a time, because it was a major infrastructure scheme. They attracted the levy for the council, and the council had to pay it. However, like I say, it's always the employer who is liable. However, one of the great strengths of the levy, it gives an awful lot of autonomy for local decision making. And that brings us into the next slide, which talks about exemptions and discounts. And the vast majority of these are local choice. A difference between an exemption and a discount: an exemption, an employer doesn't have to obtain a license. Somebody like, a supermarket's got a huge car park for 500 places. Do they license 500 places? Absolutely not. Customers don't pay the levy, or they don't attract the levy for the council, don't attract the cost for the employer, I beg your pardon. So they might have 30 or 40 staff, worst case scenario, that's their levy liability. Fleet vehicles aren't used for commuting, are outside the scope of the levy. We have the World UK for Boots in Nottingham. They have a massive fleet of articulated lorries. Those vehicles aren't used for commuting, i.e. going to and from home, so they're outside the scope of the levy. Discounts, this is where Nottingham chose these, and we picked these ourselves. As you would expect, we give 100% discount for disabled blue badge holders, and we also exempt small employers. That's those who provide 10 or less liable places. And the reason we chose 10 as our threshold when we were developing it is because that put about 75 to 80% of employers outside the scope of the levy. Bearing in mind our scheme was delayed in being implemented because of the recession, which became a double dip recession. What it did, it actually now allowed us to wrap around employers when they were having a horrendously difficult time. Staff were on short working hours, a lot of redundancies potentially. We worked to get employees correctly licensed, but used some innovative solutions to keep them in that discounted category. And that was the difference between some businesses folding and some succeeding. And now things have improved, believe it or not, pre-COVID. And those employees have gone on to grow, and they now pay the levy, and they really appreciated the response that the council took when they were having that dilemma. But let me pose a question to you. The NHS in Nottingham, we have 2 huge hospitals. We have the regional trauma centre called the Queen's Medical Centre. They are the largest provider of workplace parking across the whole of the city, but they receive 100% discount from the workplace parking levy. We took that decision 9-10 years ago because the levy was contentious enough in its own right. But let me pose the question now to perhaps Devon County Council, when you're thinking of the levy. Is that the right thing to do, given that the climate has changed somewhat? And I don't talk about the physical climate, I talk about the business climate and everything else. if we've got 3,000 people commuting to the hospital, massively creating, contributing to congestion, is it right that those people or that employer gets a discount? If you work in finance or HR in senior management in Nottingham City Council and drive your car to work and you park, you will pay a charge, because Nottingham City Council has a car park management scheme, and our principle is if you park, you will pay. But if you occupy those same roles in the NHS, you get it for free. An interesting dilemma that a number of politicians are scratching their heads around, given that, and first of all, I would say I'm not anti-NHS at all. My mum was a lifelong servant to the NHS as a midwife, God rest her. So I'm not NHS, but massively difficult political decision, because most of us love the NHS. They're the best thing since sliced bread, but you can't get away that they are massively contributing to the problem of congestion and poor air quality. What have we done? We made a big point of supporting business throughout the development of the WPL, and certainly when it went live, and we've continued that right up to this present day. I employ a dedicated travel planner. He gives all sorts of different advice around travel planning, as you would expect, including car park management. It's amazing how many employers have got car parks as assets that are hugely valuable, that they have no management around them at all. Half the time, perhaps that's a bit of an exaggeration now, a lot of the time they don't even know who's parking on their premises. We've encouraged them to sort of take ownership of their car parks with a view to them minimising and managing their workplace parking levy liability. We put on all sorts of different road shows. We have a funny guy who goes with this bike where you put some fruit in it, you pedal it, and you end up with a smoothie, which is a fantastic attraction to people. And we've actually sort of seen modal shift in some of our larger employers. We also support our traffic management colleagues, where we identify where we've got displaced parking from the levy and where it's causing problems. I put money towards funding traffic management measures. That can be junction protection, it can be restricted waiting hours, it can even be no waiting at all, because we obviously need to manage the free flow of the highway. What we've done from the start, we've put about £150,000 a year towards grants. So employers could apply for these grants to provide transport, cycling and active travel infrastructure. So it's not just a cycle shelter. It can go towards showers. It can go towards drying cabinets, because pre-COVID, I used to cycle in every day all year round. There was nothing worse than going into the office when you're soaking wet in November or December, and you put in the same really cold, wet clothes on when you're coming home at 5 or 6 in the evening. They proved really popular. And now employers can get up to £25,000 for infrastructure grants, and we've added some other funding from transport strategy colleagues. So actually we can provide electric vehicle charging infrastructure for employees as well. And we've modified it and we've moved, and we now make that match funded. So employers will match fund us. We will go up to £25,000, but whatever we provide, employers must provide the same. And normally they go way over the top because they want to provide good facilities for their employees. So how have we done? Well, business didn't like the levy. They're never going to like the levy. At the end of the day, it's a tax. I wouldn't pay my income tax if I didn't have to. But we've had an awful lot of positive response. We've built up some wonderful working relationships with employers. We've delivered 100% compliance of liable employers since year one. We've generated £80 million of new revenue, and I'll talk a little bit more about the outcomes later on. We did an awful lot of formal and informal consultation. We did a formal examination in public in 2007, chaired by an independent transport planner, who we captured all the different employers' responses, as well as objections and support from all around the world. And I'm supporting colleagues in Leicester who've just put their local travel plan out for consultation, literally at the beginning of last week. And we're looking at all their responses. And the WPL, which is featured in that local travel plan, is getting an awful lot of support from around the country.
Steve, sorry to interrupt. Have you got, is this your last slide, Steve? Nigel, sorry.
Almost, I'm going on, forgive me. So let me just talk about the outcomes then. So we've seen a massive fall in congestion growth. We've reduced congestion growth by 47%. We've raised over £80 million for public transport infrastructure. We've now got a tram network that carries between 19 and 20 million passengers a year. We've got one of Europe's largest fleet of electric buses. We've got the world's largest fleet of biogas double-decker buses. And I've continued to support the local link bus network, which targets those communities that aren't particularly well served by the commercial bus companies. The scheme has been independently academically evaluated, and it's been shown it does have a congestion growth effect without affecting the local economy. In fact, the feedback is good public transport is an attractor to employers to relocate in Nottingham. And because we've provided local funding, we've brought in £600 million worth of external investment that's allowed us to have our first air quality management plan signed off by the government. We were the first local authority in the UK. So forgive me when I get in the flow, even though that's very abbreviated, I can go on. My normal presentation is about 30 minutes, so please forgive me. And I'm
that's great.
going into the breakout sessions and trying to answer any questions people may have.